Welcome to Unit 6, Lesson 4, A More Perfect Union. George Washington's Presidency. Would you want to be President of the United States? You might be surprised to hear that George Washington did not want the job. He knew that being the first president of the new country wouldn't be easy, but his countrymen wanted Washington. The first president. George Washington was the obvious choice to be the nation's first president. He was a dignified man of strong character. Better yet, he was a natural leader, which he had proved during the American Revolution. Success in the new republic was not at all assured, but Washington accepted the challenge. Even though he didn't want the job, Washington guided the new government through its early years. As the newly written Constitution directed, the Electoral College determined who would be president in this first election, not the people. Every one of the 69 electors voted for Washington. The reluctant candidate won hands down. John Adams, who was the runner-up, became the vice president. On April 23, 1789, thousands of cheering citizens in New York City, the country's temporary capital, welcomed Washington. He took the oath of office a week later and began his difficult task. Washington had to invent the role of president as he went along. "My station is new," he said, "and walk on untrodden ground," he wrote in a letter. Everything he did would set a precedent or establish an example for all future presidents. Washington particularly wanted to make it clear that he was President of the United States, not its king. He dressed plainly for his inauguration, the ceremony that marked the beginning of his presidency, in an American-made brown suit. And he refused to be called His Excellency or Your Highness, as John Adams had suggested. After much debate, Washington decided that Mr. President would do just fine. An ocean of difficulties. Once in office, Washington got to work, and there was a lot to do. As he himself described it, the nation faced an ocean of difficulties. The new government had to deal with problems within the country as well as conflicts in the Northwest Territory and wars across the Atlantic. To tackle all these situations, both the President and Congress had certain responsibilities and powers as spelled out in the Constitution. Essentially, Congress would make the laws and the President would ensure they were carried out. But not everything was covered in the Constitution. Here, too, Washington set precedents. For example, he took control of treaty negotiations, bypassing Congress, and established a policy of neutrality in foreign conflicts, insisting it was within the president's power to do so. Fortunately, the framers of the Constitution did foresee the need for departments to assist the president. Congress had the power to create the departments, and the president decided who would head them. Together, the heads of the departments are called a cabinet. Washington picked men from a variety of geographical areas, and with a mix of political views for his cabinet. He strongly advocated political moderation and tried to keep himself, as president, above the bickering that went on between political factions. That way, he believed he could do what was best for the country. Washington appointed a group of highly talented men to his cabinet and hoped they'd put aside their political differences too. Cabinet and courts. Imagine trying to play a game of soccer or basketball without any teammates. It wouldn't work. George Washington didn't guide the new country alone, either. He gathered an A-list of team members to help him. Assembling a team. In the summer of 1789, Congress created the Departments of State, Treasury, and War as part of the executive branch. Washington appointed the department heads, called secretaries, and they formed his cabinet. To oversee relations with other countries, Washington chose Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. As Secretary of War, former General Henry Knox would see the country's defense. And to manage the government's money, Washington selected Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. Congress also created the office of the Attorney General, whose primary role was to represent the United States before the Supreme Court. He would be a member of the Washington's cabinet, but unlike the others, he would not head an executive department. Edmund Randolph served as the first Attorney General of the United States. The president called his cabinet secretaries together for regular meetings. However, you might be surprised to learn that Vice President John Adams was not invited to these meetings. The vice president soon realized the limitations of his position. "My country," he wrote, "has in its wisdom contrived or designed for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man designed or his imagination conceived." The highest court in the land. In addition to building the cabinet, Washington and Congress created a court system. The Constitution established a Supreme Court as the nation's highest court, but it left the question of how many justices would sit on the court to Congress and didn't specify what its powers would be. So in 1789, Congress passed the Federal Judiciary Act. It called the Supreme Court to have 6 justices, 1 Chief Justice, and 5 Associate Justices. Today, 8 Associate Justices sit on the court. The Chief Justice presides over the judicial branch of the United States government, as well as over the Supreme Court itself. John Jay, in the picture to your right, became the country's first Chief Justice. The act created the world's first dual court system, with responsibilities split between state and federal courts. Federal courts handled interstate and international cases, disputes regarding the U.S. Constitution, and civil and criminal cases related to federal laws. State courts dealt with cases involving state laws and civil disputes within states. The act also created lower or less powerful federal courts. The federal government established executive departments and a working system of courts, but more challenges lay in store. For one thing, there was a small matter of a very large war debt to be paid.
That move's illegal. Hand me the rules, I'll show you. These aren't the... Oh, never mind. Dear Tim and Moby, what does the Supreme Court do? From Ted. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the United States. It decides on legal cases that deal with federal laws, laws that affect the whole country and the Constitution. The Supreme Court decisions are made by 9 judges or justices. There's 1 Chief Justice and 8 Associate Justices. These justices are nominated by the President and approved by the Senate. When a justice is approved, he or she has the job for life. The court's most important power is judicial review, or the right to declare laws unconstitutional. That means that a law passed by Congress and signed by the President can be struck down by the Supreme Court. Aww. Well, the Constitution is the ultimate law in the United States. So, if Congress passes a law that violates the Constitution in some way, the Supreme Court can declare that law against the law. Well, Congress wouldn't make unconstitutional laws on purpose. Interpreting the law can be complicated, and deciding whether a law is unconstitutional can be a matter of opinion. In fact, that's what Supreme Court decisions are called, opinions. No, not just any case goes to the Supreme Court. See, the court is the top authority of the federal government's judicial branch. It's the last stop for cases that have been appealed through the federal court system. When a case is decided, the losing side has the right to appeal the decision to a higher court. It's sort of like getting a second opinion from a doctor. A case can be appealed until it reaches the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court doesn't accept every case it's presented with. In fact, it refuses to hear most cases. They get thousands of requests for hearings every year, so they have to choose the few that they think are the most important. Did you find those rules yet? See, it says right here you can't move twice in a row. You can't appeal it. They're rules. Oh, that's real mature.
Just a quick review before we end this video. George Washington became the first president of the United States and appointed his cabinet members. A cabinet are heads of the departments. An inauguration, a ceremony that marked the beginning of his presidency. The Supreme Court is the nation's highest court. At the time, it had 6 justices. Today, we have 8 justices. Congress created the Departments of State, Treasury, and War as part of the executive branch. That's all for today's video.